an opinion piece has just been published in the British Evening Standard, and it's written by a former British health minister. His name is Andy Burnham, and this is the chap, or one of the people, who was instrumental in the sort of pressure during the build-up that forced this infected blood inquiry in the UK. Okay, this Andy Burnham, and he actually said that if the government, in his retirement speech leaving British Parliament, he actually said that if he was a Labour MP, but he said that if the then Conservative government with Theresa May, who was Prime Minister, I think this is back in 2017, if she didn't call for a public inquiry into, which is their equivalent of a Royal Commission, into the infected blood scandal, he was going to go to Scotland Yard, the police. So Andy Burnham's written this opinion piece, and I think there's of actual interest to us here at Infected Blood Australia and anyone else who cares about the current state of our health system, to be honest. So I'm going to go ahead and read Andy Burnham his opinion piece. He's now the Mayor of Manchester. He's left Parliament, as I said, I think that was in 2017. And as I say, just before, in his last speech, which we've also shared before at Infected Blood Australia, his last speech, he actually said that basically he was going to go to the police and that contaminated blood, the infected blood scandal was a cover-up on a criminal, an industrial criminal scale. Strong words from this man. And so I'll read his opinion piece and I might comment as we go along. What hope can we have, says Andy Burnham, that the COVID inquiry, which finally began this week, will deliver the truth at the first time of asking? It is certainly an inquiry which matters hugely to millions, but if the circumstances of its launch are anything to go by, people are already entitled to have their doubts. The PM's official announcement came just 2 days after bereaved families felt the need to threaten a judicial review over continued delays. Not a great look, and hardly what you would call getting off on the right foot. Consider this alongside proceedings this week at another major public inquiry involving the Department of Health, and you have even more grounds for fearing the worst. The infected blood inquiry is looking into how thousands of haemophiliacs came to be infected with hepatitis C and HIV from faulty blood products imported from the US in the 1970s and 1980s, with over 2,000 lives and countless more ruined. Now, I'm just going to say this. These blood products that were used by haemophiliacs, there is actually a core participant of this inquiry, a Di Thomas Griffiths, who said that he saw that on his product it said made in laboratories in Australia, and presumably that means it was made by Australia's biggest business, CSL, and he actually had to have a liver transplant, so it's very serious. And this whole export of blood, that blood is Australia's biggest business, and Australia exported contaminated blood throughout Asia. So this inquiry will be looking into whether Australia did in fact export blood to the UK, all right, but we know that Australian blood products, okay, which were derived from Australian prisoners, from sex workers, and even people they knew to be infected with viruses. Isn't that incredible? But that's factually the case. And these same blood products have killed thousands of patients here in Australia. And unlike the British, okay, there's no financial assistance at all, and there's no answers. I'll read on. So I'll read on what Andy Burnham's got to say. Just as with the COVID inquiry, those affected had to fight to get the blood inquiry started. In their case, for 3 whole decades and more. This week, former ministers gave evidence, including Sir John Major, who described the situation as incredibly bad luck. This is the official UK government line that civil servants have given to every minister since the scandal first broke. It is certainly what I was told as Health Secretary in 2010. It has held for 40 years or more, but I don't think it can hold much longer. I am due to give evidence to the inquiry 2 weeks tomorrow, so there is a limit to what I can say here. What I can say is that the experience of the victims of the contaminated blood, whilst extreme, is by no means unique. Just like the thalidomide victims before them, those damaged by sodium valproate are still fighting for answers. Only 2 weeks ago, victims of the pregnancy test Primadose were in court having to fight a government bid to bully them into silence and then consider one of the most egregious injustices of them all, the plight of the nuclear test veterans. These men serving our country overseas and exposed to nuclear blasts without their knowledge, consent or protective equipment. Despite huge health harms to them and their descendants, they have never had access to their medical records. Why does the state go to such lengths to prevent innocent victims being given the answers they deserve? It is partly about reputations, but mainly about money. What have all these health scandals have in common is a default government response primarily driven by a fear of potential financial exposure rather than compassion for victims. This culture is ingrained in the British civil service and explains why its judgment is so clouded. You can see this thinking in a document released this week from John Major's time in the Treasury. It warned against a sympathetic response to infected blood victims as it could lead to open-ended commitment of huge dimensions. Of course, every minister must consider the financial implications of their decisions, but it should always be a secondary concern behind what is morally right. In fact, telling the truth at the first time of asking can save money in the long run. It is what should happen, but a long list of justice campaigns proves it is not what actually happens. So how do we break the cycle of repeated injustice and put the right values at the heart of the British state? The only way it will ever happen is if MPs on all sides get behind the proposed Hillsborough Law. Now, this is, I'll just interrupt here. The Hillsborough Law is talking about a law that would never allow a situation like the cover-up of that Hillsborough, that terrible police cover-up of the Hillsborough scandal where all those football fans were killed. And it was because police had let too many fans into the ground. But of course, for decades, police changed that and actually blamed it on fans and cast them off as hooligans, which they were not. Many of them were family people. There were no hooligans. It was actually negligence on part of police and on people in charge of the football game that day. So that is what Andy Burnham's referring to. And he was, of course, instrumental in getting some action on that Hillsborough scandal. And he was also, of course, as I mentioned earlier, part of that whole pressure that helped force the infected blood inquiry in the UK. Okay, so I'm just going to continue reading what Burnham has to say. Next month, the Mayor of Liverpool City Region and I will be in Parliament to hand our proposed law, this Hillsborough Law, over to MPs. Its central proposal is a duty of candour. Oh, wow. So that duty of candour, how important. A duty of candour on all public servants, a legal and contractual duty to tell the truth at the first time of asking. Do you know, if that would be the best day of my life, I reckon, if I ever heard that was possible here in Australia. That would solve so many problems. The COVID inquiry, I'll read on, the COVID inquiry is arguably the biggest and most important public inquiry this country has ever seen. But it will struggle to get to the truth if the civil service adopts its default approach. In my experience, the vast majority of civil servants are good people, but they are asked to work in a system that is too desensitised. Let's allow them to do the job they entered the profession to do, serving the public. And that means passing the Hillsborough Law now. In other words, and the Burnham's piece is finished, but in other words, making duty of candour happen. Making it that the people that we who serve us and we pay to serve us have to tell the truth, okay? And so wouldn't we be so much better off today in Australia if they told the truth about these lockdowns, that they weren't a success at all? In fact, they've ruined our economy, they've ruined families, they've increased suicide rates. And if they told the truth about the fact that these injections have not been a great success, really, when you think about it. In fact, they've been full of adverse events. I'm sure there's not been too many families that haven't heard the horror stories, and of course, to be open and candid about Australia's deadliest medical scandal. Australia had an infected blood scandal too, and in fact the British had a hand in it too. They had a hand in what happened to our haemophiliacs. See what Burnham's talking about? These thousands of lives lost to these imported blood products. Well, guess what? The British had a hand in setting up these haemophilia protocols that we had in Australia that saw to it that they used these dangerous, faulty blood products. But it's only British haemophiliacs at the moment that are getting the answers, and they deserve it. But what about our haemophiliacs in Australia that receive contaminated blood? Why haven't they ever received financial assistance? Do you know, I'm sure that if Andy Burnham heard about that, he would agree with me that that is a bloody crime and something needs to be done about it right this minute, immediately. I hope Andy Burnham, who I'm a huge fan of, I hope he gets his Hillsborough law passed. And I reckon he too would hope that we, infected blood victims in Australia, also get answers and also get help for those people that need it. Thank you for listening. And for any of you that would like to support an infected blood inquiry here in Australia, please click on the link in the bio or click on the link that'll be associated on the video if you're watching this on another platform. Thank you very much for listening.